hear the word story almost everywhere,
Yeah,
but
it's true.
it often gets, I mean, confused with giving just background or being personal or telling something entertaining, even, a bit goes into the direction exaggerating. Um, but there is actually a structure to story that helps people understand and care. Could you walk us through on what does a story need?
Yeah. Yeah, so this is something that I was very excited to share with your audience because I think a lot of times people think either I can't tell a story because I don't have something interesting enough to tell, right? We hear stories about scaling Mount Everest or saving Mother Teresa and we think, well, if I don't have that kind of story, how is it going to be interesting? How is it going to be effective? And also, how do I know which parts to say of a story?
Right.
How do I know which parts to leave out and which parts to include? And so when I first got started, as I said to you, when I first went to these shows and got very involved, I was a little bit like a small child who's interested in engineering, who takes apart a clock, to see how the insides work. This is what I did with storytelling. I wanted to take apart storytelling and see, well, what makes this tick? What makes it actually work together, a good story, a story that connects with people. And these are the things that I kind of found, especially over the course of working with many, many hundreds of people and hearing many, many hundreds of stories. So it's a very simple 4 words, and each word is very powerful. And you can almost use this as a checklist to see if you've got these pieces in a story that you want to tell. This is going to sort of guarantee for you that the people listening are going to understand what you're trying to say. But these 4 things also come into play when we want to persuade people, when we want to convince them to see things the way we want to see. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But first, let me just say each of them very quickly, sort of explain them. The first one is context. And context means, what do you need to know about me, about the situation, before we get into what happened in the story? What is the background that you need? And this is a very strategic part, because if you can tell me enough background but not too much background, then you've set up for me why I'm going to care about this issue or about this story. So the next one, and that idea of context can be a thing that you need to know about me. It can be a thing you need to know about my project or the
Right.
project we're talking about. Maybe it's about issues that have happened in the past, right? Like, what do we want to set up before we get into it?
It is like setting the scene, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
Setting the framework. Yeah.
And this doesn't have to go in the beginning. Sometimes you want to dive into something and then back up and give the context, but just making sure that people have enough background. And then the other piece of context that I find very interesting, especially for what we're talking about today, is the idea that depending on who you're talking to, that context, what context you need, is going to change. If you're talking to someone who is inside of the project with you, you share a lot of context. You don't need to explain too
Right.
much about what's happening. If you're talking in a cross-functional team and you're talking to someone who has not been inside of your project, maybe who doesn't have the vocabulary that you do for the technical pieces that you're talking about, you may need to figure out, what context do I need to give them? Enough that they understand and not so much that their eyes glaze over, right? That we want to balance that.
Very important. Yeah.
Very important, very important. And so the second one is stakes. And this one is, we know the word stakes from literature and from movies, that kind of storytelling. What do we have to win or lose as a result of what's happening here? And again, this is a place where you can both think about it to tell a good story, but you can also think about it for your audience.
Mhm.
So in a story, I want to show what I have to win or lose. What is at stake here? What do we potentially get if we succeed at this? What do we potentially lose if we don't? But we also, oh yeah, go ahead, Anna.
So it's important to have a clear goal, a
Mhm.
clear outcome defined. And I think it's important, and please correct me, or
Yeah, yeah.
um, it's also important to know what are or how is this success defined,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
not only I mean not only from the perspective of data.
Yep. And right. And the stakes sometimes could be sometimes could have layers. Maybe we want the project to succeed because we want this piece of software to work or this piece of machinery to work. That's one thing at stake. But there's a larger stake. Do we want to be seen as a company that XYZ? Do we want to make sure that safety is very forefront in the minds of not only our workers but the people who are buying what we sell? So there's different ways of thinking about stakes. And then you can also think about stakes for the person you're talking to. What do they have to win or lose? And not just about whether the project succeeds, but do they want to look good to their manager? Do they want to make sure that we stay in budget? Like,
Mhm.
what is actually at stake for them, so that as you're telling your story, you can acknowledge those pieces. You can talk about, well, I know this seems expensive and I know that budget is a concern, but here's what we would get for it. And by acknowledging their stakes, they get to feel listened to, they get to feel really seen, right? So you can use stakes in a lot of complicated ways in that.
Right.
The third one is change. And one of my very close colleagues, Kat Coppett, who's an incredible trainer in all of this stuff, Kat talks about the definition of a story is something was true, something happened, something new was true. It's as
It's a
simple
great
as that.
definition.
It's
Simple, but really, really great.
super powerful, right? I mean, she's brilliant. So this idea that all you're really doing is explaining a change. At its heart, that's all a story really is. And it might be a change that hasn't happened yet. It might be you're promising a change, right? Something
Mm.
new, something is true right now. If something happens, something new will be true. That is a promising story, right? That's a very
Yeah.
convincing story to bring to someone. Um, and so thinking about what the change of your story is, if you're telling something, what is the change you want to see? What is the change you want people to understand happened? Maybe you're giving an example of something that has happened in the past that worked, and you're trying
Mhm.
to convince us to do it again. So you want to show us that positive change. And then the final one, and this one is very, very murky. So if there's a lot we could talk about with the final one, theme. I think of theme as an editing tool. I think of theme as the way to make sure you don't go on talking forever, because sometimes we don't know which parts to include and which parts not to. But if we know that there's one thing we're talking about, what is this story really about? Am I talking about budget and that's it? Am I really just talking about this, the my need to be respected if it's a personal story?
Mm.
Then I know what to leave out, because if something that doesn't have to do with that theme, I don't need it. And so it can help you choose which details you're going to use and which details you're not. And so I feel like these four, they don't make a complete story. We can talk about the shape of a story in a little bit, but these four can be really, you can sort of ask yourself these questions as you're thinking about something you want to communicate, and you can get to some very interesting and very persuasive details.
Right. Um, I I find it very, very useful because I like structure. In the
Mhm.
same time, I like to be creative, and what you are showing us now, it's a very good structure. It's a very good checklist. Even if I was telling in my previous session that I am not necessarily a fan of checklists, but in this case, this checklist allows us also to be creative and not to deviate from the
Exactly.